Hello, everyone, and welcome to CLI's Legal Generative AI Summit 2023. I'm Terry Modishead. I'm the Executive Director of the Centre for Legal Innovation at the College of Law, and I will be your host for this session. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands in all of the places on which we meet for the summit today. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and we acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining this session. We also acknowledge and welcome all First Nations people from every country joining us for this session. Well, this is our final session, and what an amazing session it's going to be. We're focused on the importance of being human in a legal AI world. It's a topic for every day, but especially for today. And it's a really important one for us to reflect on as we close out the summit. And we have to reflect on that with the always amazing Isabel Parker. Isabel is a legal innovator. She's an author, and today she's wearing her hat. She's got a lot of hats, but today she's wearing the hat as Legal Tech UK panel member. A huge welcome to you, Isabel. It's just lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much, Terry. It's a delight to be with you. It's a real privilege to be asked to give the closing pleading address for this summit. So thank you very much for inviting me.
I'm going to take you through 45 minutes or so of presentation. And then, if there's time, we're going to go to some questions. So let me first take you back to the first time that I actually saw ChatGPT. I remember it really very vividly. I was lucky enough to be part of a very early demonstration of Anthropic's Claude. And bear in mind, I've been in the legal tech industry for a very, very long time, longer than I care to remember, and I'm pretty hard to impress. But it's no exaggeration when I tell you that during that presentation, that demonstration, the hairs on the back of my neck actually stood up. And at the end of the session, I felt emotional, like I wanted to cry. I felt like I had witnessed something that would change our profession and the world fundamentally and forever. And maybe you had a similar reaction too. Those very human emotions that I felt were a mixture of excitement, of fear, of awe, and an unexpected emotion that I can only describe as incredulous outrage. How could this technology be as good as it evidently was? And as I started to experiment in earnest with Gen AI, trying out different foundation models, trying out personal and legal use cases, these feelings really intensified. I loved the productivity hacks, the creation of first drafts to overcome that blank page syndrome, the ease and rapidity of content generation. But I also started to ask myself some pretty fundamental philosophical questions about the implications of this technology on the way we work. And those questions boiled down to one overriding question. What will it mean for us to be a human legal professional in an AI world? So during the next 45 or so minutes, I want to do three things to approach that question. I want to meet the fear and the awe, that human emotion I felt, head on by exploring what, if anything, Gen AI can really do better than we can, than humans can. I want to address that feeling of outrage by exploring what we as humans can definitively do better than generative AI. And then thirdly, I want to channel the excitement by exploring what humans and generative AI can do better together, merging and melding into a better and happier combination. And then if there's time, I hope you're going to hold me to account with some tricky questions. Okay, but before we start exploring all of these questions, I want to start with the chatter. Let me give you a history of the last year in 2 slides. Here's the first slide. It's from Goldman Sachs, a report from Goldman Sachs that came out sometime in the summer. And the narrative about Gen AI in legal has been dominated by 2 divergent schools of thought. The first is set out on this slide from Goldman Sachs, which is taken from a report that shows the likely penetration of automation by AI across different industry sectors. And as you can see, legal on the left there is in the red box. And according to Goldman, 44% of what legal professionals commonly do will be subject to automation by AI in pretty short order. This is the robots will take our jobs camp. And the message very clearly is that Gen AI is coming for us all and fast. So that's the first slide. This shows the other side of the story, if you like. You'll all recognize this. This is from Gartner. It's their hype cycle back in August of this year, I believe. And as you can see, Gartner places Gen AI right at the peak of inflated expectations, right up there at the top, with some distance to go before it reaches the plateau of productivity. And this is the it's all hype camp. And the message, legal is getting excited about a shiny new toy again. As for me, well, I sit somewhere between these two extremes. Is Gen AI just another shiny new toy? No, it's not. Will it impact lawyers' productivity? Absolutely it will. Will half of what we do be automated away in 3 years? I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe. But what I do know is that we will have to work differently, and there will be implications for all of us as legal professionals and as human beings. I think it's worth taking a moment just to dig into this machines are coming for our jobs statement, because this has been a long-running debate about the potential of new technologies to displace human beings for many, many years, from the automated loom to the motor car to the personal computer to the iPhone. There's always been a view that technology and automation is somehow a threat to our workforce. And this fear is very real, and it's deeply felt by many in our industry and shouldn't be dismissed or taken lightly. And at the height of the febrile debate back on about Gen AI back in June of this year, which seems a lifetime ago now, Mark Andreessen, who's the co-founder and general partner of the tech venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz, published an open letter, which is entitled Why AI Will Save the World. And in the letter, Andreessen addresses this issue of human labour and whether AI will result in displacement of jobs, leading to mass unemployment, or increased productivity, creating new jobs and new sources of value and wealth. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, given his role, Andreessen comes down on the side of productivity gains, is what he says. Productivity growth throughout the economy will accelerate dramatically, driving economic growth, creation of new industries, creation of new jobs, and wage growth, resulting in a new era of heightened material prosperity across the planet. And history would suggest that Andreessen is right. New technology has not resulted so far in a scale displacement of human jobs, but rather more jobs and higher wages. In fact, by late 2019, just before the onset of COVID, the world had more jobs at higher wages than ever before. And if we look at our own legal industry, we are the most automated we've ever been. And again, I think COVID had a hand in that. And we haven't seen a reduction in lawyers. Rather, we've seen a buoyant market, high wages, new disruptors, productivity growth. And this is all positive. So why is the narrative dominated by this worry about generative AI? Could it be that this time it's really different? Well, I have my own explanation for why we're so worried in the legal profession about generative AI. It comes down to this: words. Generative AI is a technology whose primary but not only use case is to generate text. And language, words, these are our tools, the lawyers' tools. We're not big on numbers. There aren't many legal professionals who really know their way around an Excel, for example. And we're not that big on pictures. Have you ever seen a law firm partner's PowerPoint? But words, words. That we can do. And we do it better and we do it more accurately than anybody else, or so we think. So Gen AI touches the lawyer's world and it uses our tools. That's the first part of this explanation. The second part is that the tech is so easy to use. And this hasn't been the case with legal AI tools to date. They've had to be trained and had to be set up and used by people that understood the product. And that's all a barrier, as we know, for busy legal professionals. But Gen AI, well, it's different, it's accessible, it's intuitive. And the third part of this explanation is not only does Gen AI work by generating words, it does so by predicting the next likely word in the sentence, according to the vast swathes of data on which it's been trained. And of course, since legal systems were first conceived, lawyers have been dealing in magic words, combinations of phrases tested in the courts, rendered bulletproof by the law, and repeated verbatim in millions of contracts. And that's why it's so easy for Gen AI to generate plausible legal output. And that's why the legal community is unsettled. Our book of spells has been hacked. Richard Susskind says that Gen AI is the worst now that it's ever going to be. A stark but brilliant phrase that really stays with me. It's only going to get better. So let me tap into my fear. What do I fear Gen AI can do better than me right now? Here is a list of 20 human attributes broken into two. On the left there on the screen are the attributes that will be shared with AI. And on the right are the attributes that are distinctive to humans. Let you just look at those for a moment and absorb them. And this is from a really great article credited at the bottom there, In the Age of Ubiquitous AI, What Does It Mean to Be Human by Stanford Business School. You can see from this list that there's a lot that AI can do that humans can do too, or vice versa, on the left. And I'd argue that on that shared list, there are actually quite a few areas where AI is already surpassing human capability. But because I have limited time, I'm going to limit this conversation to two key areas where Gen AI, in my view, surpasses human capabilities right now. So here's my first provocation. Gen AI can write more fluently, more compellingly, and more accurately than most humans. And please note my caveats about accuracy there at the bottom for the lawyers amongst you. I consider myself to be pretty good at writing. I've written a book. I did English at university. It's kind of what I do. But I think that Gen AI actually writes better than I do. It does need the right prompts, needs the right context, but my goodness, the outputs are really very, very impressive. Yes, you might say, Gen AI can generate plausible content pretty well, but it's not original, it's all derivative. Gen AI can't be original, because to be original demands cognition, and cognition is a uniquely human trait. So Gen AI can't develop original content, it can just string stuff together, strings of words, into a new combination. True, but let's challenge that for a moment. Every human work is a product of prior learning and prior exposure and experience. We learn to talk by listening to our parents or our carers. We're influenced by what we see, what we read, what we hear. Every output we generate is in some way derivative. I mean, Shakespeare himself, who must have coined hundreds of new phrases and words, was himself influenced by others that came before him. And there have been lots of scholarly debate about the originality and authorship of some of his works. Nothing is truly original. And the fact that Gen AI cannot be original doesn't detract from what I consider to be a really hard but important truth. Gen AI is better at writing than most of us. Applying this to our world of legal professionals, where does the threat or the opportunity lie? Well, given the right context, examples, guardrails, and prompts, Gen AI could do a better job of drafting a complex contract than most of us. Quicker, too. Gen AI could summarize that contract, and rewrite it for the CEO of the company better than we could. It could translate it into different languages more accurately than most of us could. It could simplify the wording in the contract better than most of us could, and it could create a template for reuse much quicker and probably more accurately than we could. And remember, it's only going to get better. Here's my second provocation. Gen AI can predict outcomes more accurately than humans will ever be able to. So this is the second thing I believe Gen AI can do much better than humans will ever be able to do, predicting outcomes. Not because it has the ability to think, it doesn't, of course, it cannot think, but because it can pass vast quantities of data, including now unstructured data, documents, in far higher quantities than human beings could ever hope to do in a lifetime. And it can look for trends and patterns in that data to deliver new insight. And this is something it does better than us right now. And this is the worst it will ever be. And our brains are not going to get any bigger. And guess what? Most lawyers aren't very good with data. For a profession that prides ourselves on the value of precedent, we're curiously reluctant to use hard data and evidence to inform our work. To quote my good friend Mark Cohen, lawyers will say, my nose tells me, or my gut tells me. It's all lived experience and visceral response rather than hard data. And sometimes that will be right, and sometimes it won't. Applying this to the world of legal professionals, where does the threat or the opportunity lie for us? Gen AI, I believe, will be able to predict the outcome of contentious matters better than a litigation counsel is able to. It will be able to predict areas of non-compliance with regulations and internal policies more accurately than in-house counsel will be able to, and suggest ways to mitigate. It will be able to proactively suggest acquisition targets better than a private equity lawyer could with all their market knowledge. And it will only get better. Okay, so far so good. But just as there are things that Gen AI already does better than we do, there are some areas where Gen AI cannot hope to compete, where humans are simply better and will always be better. And these are the things that are uniquely and intrinsically human. So first obvious statement, number one. Humans are better than Gen AI at being authentic. What on earth do I mean by that? Well, Gen AI is a great writer, as I pointed out earlier. It generates output that's highly plausible, highly accomplished. But is that enough? Imagine if this presentation now were being given to you by a thought leader who had never practiced law, never worked in a legal environment, never used generative AI, never worked on anything to do with legal technology, and had just read a bunch of articles. And just for the record, I'm not referring to myself there. I have done all of these things, I promise you. I have the battle scars to prove it. But if someone was giving this presentation now, with all those attributes or lack of attributes, you wouldn't give them the same hearing that you are giving to me at the moment. You would see that person for what they were, a non-authentic phony. Quite rightly. Well, that's a bit like Gen AI. It has no lived experience. It can sound plausible, but it hasn't got the battle scars. It can't show up authentically. And law is still about people. It's about representing victims of crime in court. It's about persuading a client that their litigation strategy is flawed. It's about working late with a client to restructure their board memo. You get the picture. And in these circumstances, the most accurate contract or the most detailed data isn't going to get you there. You have to show up authentically as a human being with your lived experience. And only humans can do this. And very good lawyers. So authentic lived experience correctly channeled becomes a human differentiator. Closely allied to this, but slightly different perhaps, is the second area where I believe humans will always beat AI. Obvious statement number 2 reads that humans are better than Gen AI at human connection. There are some people, some humans, who have a very high EQ. They're able to read a room, to modify their language, their tone, or their approach to suit the personalities in that room, to make people like them and confide in them things they wouldn't tell others, to influence at all levels and achieve a successful outcome in a uniquely human way. This is something that AI cannot emulate. Yes, there's sentiment analysis and facial recognition and all those kind of tools that are really clever and take AI some of the way, but I contend that these tools will never be able to replicate human connectivity or EQ. Let me give you an example. I recently presented at a forum for a group of senior company secretaries, and their role is really very unique. So they look after the board. They are the sort of connective tissue between the executive and the non-executive directors. They advise on strategy, they advise on reporting and governance, and they also take board minutes. So I blithely presented to the group saying, Gen AI can definitely help with board minutes. You know, it can transcribe effectively, it can summarize, it can format, you know, your job is done. And this was met with sort of a stony face from these professionals, because it appears that taking the minutes at a FTSE 100 board meeting is a uniquely and distinctly human activity, requiring an extraordinary level of nuance, sophistication, and EQ. Of course, you have to record the meeting faithfully, but there are so many undertones that also have to be captured, synthesizing the different moods and personalities in the room. The angry look, the enthusiastic nod, the history of the relationship, the sarcasm. It's an exercise in synthesizing human connectivity, a very human skill, and I don't think one that AI could ever hope to replicate. Let's do a quick check-in on where we are. So, what have we done? We've acknowledged the fear. We've talked about the fact that Gen AI will massively increase the level of automation in the legal industry, rapidly becoming better or at least quicker at lots of legal tasks than humans can be. We've talked about the economic arguments, the theories of displacement versus productivity, and we've acknowledged the fear that our jobs will be taken by machines, and we've acknowledged the fact that AI right now is the worst it's ever going to be. We've also addressed the outrage. It's definitively not game over for the human legal professional. There's still a lot of value in being a human being. There are things that we can do that AI will never be able to do. There are intrinsic human qualities that AI will never be able to emulate. And these human qualities are critical to our profession. And it's this binary approach of pitting the technology against the human. That's where many of us in the industry are right now, and I get it. If you're a LinkedIn user, for example, you'll have seen there are definitely two camps out there when it comes to Gen AI. One camp is perhaps overly optimistic about the benefits and promise of this technology for the industry, and the other is highly skeptical and simply won't accept there's any valid use cases for Gen AI out there at all, in practice of law at least. And I think in pitting lawyer against the machine in this way, we're asking ourselves the wrong questions. So let's move to the third focus of this presentation, channeling the excitement. There we go. No presentation on AI will be complete without a robot reference. Here's mine. Shaking hands across the divide. Because the truth is, to progress as human legal professionals in an AI world, we need a handshake between lawyer and algorithm, a melding of the human brain with a neural net. Because we need AI, but AI also needs us. Let me explain. Let's go back to the earlier discussion about robots taking our jobs and the conclusion that, consistent with the theory of productivity increase rather than displacement, Gen AI will allow us to automate lower-level legal tasks, freeing up human lawyers to do the more interesting strategic work that we just never had time for because we were all mired in drudgery. I get that, and I can accept that premise. And for the really impressive lawyers out there, those with deep legal technical knowledge, but also highly developed EQ, with loads of lived experience, who show up authentically to sprinkle fairy dust at board meetings, this is a fabulous outcome. And these are the lawyers that display the very finest human qualities. But there aren't many of those lawyers out there, let's be honest. And to gain that lived experience, to develop the ability to manage relationships in a sophisticated way, you need to cut your teeth on some kind of legal work. You don't just leave law school and get catapulted into the boardroom. It doesn't work like that. So although human lawyers can still match or exceed AI in a number of ways, we're going to have to work harder to do it, and we're going to have to work out how we do it. We're going to have to be really rounded humans and really skilled lawyers to do better than AI. Put simply, we're going to have to raise our game. How do we do this? Well, the good news is that we have a friend and tool to help us, our legal co-pilot, Generative AI. We don't need to present Gen AI and lawyers as being in competition with each other. It's not a binary choice. The best way to be a fully rounded, high-achieving, fully human legal professional in an AI world is to use AI to augment our capabilities and help us move and learn faster. All sounds good, but what does this actually mean in practice? Let me explain this image to you for a moment. So this image and the concept of the centaur versus the cyborg is taken from a really wonderful paper that some of you may have read. It's by Harvard Business School and Boston Consulting Group, which is a high-end consultancy firm. And it's got a super academic title, Navigating the Jagged Technological Frontier, Field Experimental Evidence of the Effects of AI on Knowledge Worker Productivity and Quality. It's a big mouthful, but its subtitle is Centaurs and Cyborgs. I really urge you to read this excellent paper. It describes an experiment that was conducted by Harvard Business School with BCG, this Boston Consulting Group, the management consulting firm. And I'm going to have to give you a little bit of a long explanation, but bear with me because I promise you it really is worth it. The experiment was to assess the degree to which generative AI could be applied to the day-to-day real-life work of the consultants. Bear in mind, they're knowledge workers, just like lawyers. And the impact Gen AI would have on their performance, their productivity, and the quality of their work. The experiment involved 758 consultants at BCG, so that's a big sample size, and they were given randomized access to GPT-4. That's the one we can all access by paying a monthly fee. And just the base foundation model, no training, no prompting, no fine-tuning. And in the experiment, the consultants were asked to complete a number of tasks for a fictional shoe company. And it was all work that the BCG team had confirmed would accurately represent the kind of work the consultants would do day to day. There were some creative tasks, like propose at least 10 ideas for a new shoe. Some analytical tasks, segment the shoe market into market segments. And some writing and marketing tasks, drafting a press release for the product. You get the picture. And these were all tasks that the creators of the experiment expected the AI to do pretty well at. And the results were really interesting in two ways. First, the consultants with AI access did significantly better than those without across every measurement. Time it took to complete tasks, 12% more tasks on average. How quickly the tasks were completed, 25% more tasks completed more quickly. And the quality of the output, 40% higher quality results. That's the first interesting point, just made people better. The second interesting point is that Gen AI operated as a skills leveler. So the worst performing consultants, as measured at the beginning of the experiment, had the biggest jump in their performance through using AI, 43%. The top consultants still did better, but nowhere near as big a differential. So that's really interesting already, but there's more. The experiment was designed to include a task that AI was unlikely to be able to do well, where it would give a wrong but convincing answer to a problem that humans would be able to solve. In this case, AI became a hindrance, not a help. The consultants who didn't use AI got the problem right 84% of the time. The consultants that did use AI, only 60 to 70%. That made them worse. Why? Well, the explanation that the paper gives is so interesting. The consultants who were using the AI for a problem it wasn't well adapted to solve simply fell asleep at the wheel and relied too much on the tool without applying their judgment to the output. So over-dependence and lack of critical use of AI can have very negative effects. Here we are. This is a quote. When the AI is very good, humans have no reason to work hard and pay attention. They let the AI take over instead of using it as a tool. He called this falling asleep at the wheel, and it can hurt human learning, skill development, and productivity. So to avoid this outcome, people need to understand where AI is effective and where it is not, and continue to apply human overlay and thinking to AI outputs in the areas where the tech doesn't perform so well. So we have to define our relationship with AI and work out where the handshake is. Let's go back to the research paper briefly, just to explain what this might look like in practice. In the BCG example, the consultants that work best with the technology followed two different approaches, and the researchers described those approaches as centaurs and cyborgs. Centaurs, you'll see them here, mythical creature, half human, half horse. And the consultants labeled centaurs respected the line between the person and the technology, like the line between the human torso and the horse body. And they had made a strategic division of labor, switching between AI and human tasks, allocating responsibilities based on the strengths and capabilities of each. So in the experiment, the centaurs would do the work that they were strongest at themselves, and then hand off tasks to the tech, where they knew AI would do really well. We apply this to our legal world. Imagine a legal task with 5 steps. You've got to find a doc, draft a new contract based on it, amend some of the provisions with comments, extract the key provisions and stick them in a table, and then summarize the contract for your client. 5 steps. A centaur, who knows what Gen AI does better and worse, would probably use AI in steps 1, 4, and 5, where we know it performs well. The more complicated lawyerly elements, 2 and 3, they would keep for themselves. Cyborgs are a different story. So they blend machine and human and integrate the two very deeply. They don't just delegate tasks out to the AI, they work together with the AI in an iterative way. So bits of task gets handed over to the AI. You might start drafting and then hand over to the AI to finish your provision draft, rather than segmenting cleanly between the two. Less of a clear line, more of an iterative approach. So if we go back to our 5 steps in our legal task, the cyborg would have AI playing in all of these steps, perhaps at the drafting and amending stage, using iterative prompting and context to get the AI to finish what the human lawyer started, with some human polish at the end. To be a cyborg, I think, requires quite a sophisticated understanding of how to prompt the tech, finding the context, the task, the persona, and the outputs really clearly. How fascinating it would be to do a similar experiment with a law firm or corporate legal team. It may be that consultants are a more receptive bunch to technology than lawyers, I don't know, but the nature of the work really isn't dissimilar, and we can make an assumption from this study that similar outcomes could be achieved in the legal context. So this is the first step in our handshake with AI. But there's more to this, more to that handshake than us simply using Gen AI for our purposes. It's not as one-sided as that. We have a responsibility, a unique human responsibility as legal professionals, to help Gen AI be the best that it can be. We need to practice responsible AI. And this responsibility feels uniquely within the jurisdiction of the legal professional. As we start to work more and more with this technology, as cyborgs or centaurs, we've got to make sure it's reliable and it's safe, not just for our individual use, but for the wider world. There are risks associated with Gen AI, and you can see them here. We've all heard about hallucinations, and there's lots of coverage of the IP challenges of training and checking the output for new content from an IP perspective. And these are certainly commercial risks that should be borne in mind. But there are darker and more pernicious risks that we need to be alert to. I'd like to focus in on bias as an example. We all know that AI models have an inherent bias that reflect the data sets they were trained on. But this is a real risk, and it can have real human consequences. Bloomberg recently published some analysis of what they perceive to be biases in Stable Diffusion's text-to-image model. This is where you type something and it gives you a picture. They published an article, Bloomberg, entitled "Humans Are Biased, Generative AI is Even Worse," presenting the results of analysis of over 5,000 images created by the Stable Diffusion model. And they found that the model actually amplifies stereotypes about race and gender. The article makes the following chilling opening statement: "The world, according to Stable Diffusion, is run by white male CEOs. Women are rarely doctors, lawyers, or judges. Men with dark skin commit crimes, while women with dark skin flip burgers." So, for example, when Stable Diffusion was asked to generate an image associated with a particular job, like a doctor or a lawyer or a janitor, whatever it might be, the Bloomberg analysis found that images for higher paid jobs were dominated by lighter skin tones and lower paid jobs with darker skin tones. And you can see the results on this slide here. I mean, if you just sort of step back and just look at the gradation of color, you can see that this is a very human problem that's being sort of atomized out at scale here. And we've got a real human responsibility to ensure that this kind of bias does not proliferate. As Gen AI models become built into other platforms and other technologies and solutions, there's a real risk that embedded bias becomes widespread across our society, replicating this human problem that we've created at scale. So what can we do as human professionals to combat this kind of bias? Well, as we're working with this technology, as we're training it, experimenting with it, prompting it, we need to be very alert to identify and remove biased data from training sets. This is challenging when we're working with foundation models. We might not have the ability to influence the output, but we can put guardrails in place to detect bias retroactively in live models and make sure we correct for it. And this could be super simple, just making sure that the team working on Gen AI within your organization is as diverse and representative as possible. The same is true for ethical use of AI, third down on this list. We have a human duty as legal professionals to ensure that Gen AI isn't used for illegal or immoral or unkind purposes. The technology may be a very intelligent human substitute, but just like a child prodigy, it needs guidelines and guardrails and hand-holding to be safe. But let's go back to our Gen AI human handshake. Gen AI acts as our co-pilot and friend, and we help Gen AI to be a better human substitute. Sounds like a good contract to me. We're approaching the end of our time, so let's switch gears one last time and talk about how we make this real. How do we encourage all the lawyers and allied professionals listening to this or watching this to become a centaur or a cyborg and commit to that handshake between human and machine? What incentives need to be put in place? How does the operating model of law firms and corporate legal teams need to change? What skills and capabilities will need to be adapted or developed? Well, here are 5 priorities or calls to action, if you like, that I think are critical for everyone tuning in here to consider. We start at number 1 with something very dear to the heart of organisers of this summit: education. How do legal educators need to adapt their programmes to support a Gen AI legal world? Well, it seems to me there are 2 clear priorities. The first is to embrace this technology as part of the learning experience and encourage students to work with Gen AI as a co-pilot, as a friend, precisely as we hope they will be doing when they get into practice. And I do think that law schools are starting to get it. I know that the College of Law Australia, for example, is embracing this technology, and other leading educational establishments are doing the same. But the second point goes beyond technology skills to focus on the human skills that will be the legal professionals' true differentiator in our Gen AI-enabled future. How do we create the next generation of legal professionals who are empathetic, agile, business-focused? The big question, but it seems to me that we need something that feels more like an MBA than an LLM. So that's education. The next call to action, if you like, is strategy. My very strong feeling is that we are no longer, thank goodness, in the land of the tactical legal tech point solution. Gen AI has changed that narrative. Technology and tooling remain important, critical to the operating models of law firms and corporate legal teams, but the tech's going to evolve regardless. It's just going to happen. What needs to be pushed to evolve are the organizations themselves. So every law firm and every corporate legal team listening to me today to be revisiting their strategy in the light of Gen AI. What does it mean for your workforce planning, for your service catalog, for the way you price your products and services, for your culture, for how you organize yourself as a business or a law firm? These are really big strategic questions that need to be considered and planned for right now. My third call to action will be around training and skills. And this is, for me, the biggest unanswered question. I don't even know how to approach answering this. Bigger minds than me can crack it. In a Gen AI-enabled workplace, how do we train our up-and-coming legal professionals? What skills and capabilities are required? What's the optimal mix? And where are we going to recruit this new generation of professionals? How are we going to develop and train them, particularly if a lot of the more commoditized, if you like, work becomes automated? This is a huge challenge. The fourth call to action is around experimentation. Experimentation is an urgent priority for every organization, and I passionately believe that until you have experimented with this technology, you cannot understand it and you cannot see its potential. And it's free. It's free, it's out there, and it's so easy and intuitive to use. There really is no excuse for not experimenting with this technology. So change makers listening to this is your call to action. Get everyone in your firm or your legal team using generative AI in a safe way. Lawyers are super clever people. That's one thing that they have in common. They are going to come up with really great use cases for this technology, both for productivity reasons and beyond, that we can't develop in a vacuum. So get them experimenting. Let's drive change from the inside. And finally, final call to action is about support. Change is hard. It can be very destabilizing. The world is a messy and volatile place, particularly at the moment. So there are going to be a number of different reactions to this technology. Some people will really benefit from the productivity increase, use it to make their working lives better and easier. A recent study, a UK study from a consultancy, showed that nearly half of the UK workforce is now using Gen AI to increase their productivity, and it's helping them to achieve a better work-life balance. And many legal professionals really need this. It's a hard job that we do. It can be very draining and very time-consuming. How wonderful to have a release from the relentless pressure of our day job. But some people might have a completely different reaction to this technology. They might find it threatening, unsettling, and it might even find that those productivity increases simply mean they're doing more, even more strain on an already time-constrained profession. So it's our human duty not to forget the human challenge of helping our people with this change and supporting them through it. So there you have it. These are my views on the importance of being a human in a generative AI world. And I truly believe there's never been a more exciting time to be a legal professional. Let's embrace the change. Let's use AI, but let's use it responsibly. Let's channel our inner centaur or cyborg and let the technology teach us how to become better, more productive, more human legal professionals.
Thanks, Isabel. Very thought-provoking presentation there, and we do have some questions. So let me jump straight into those. First one I've got here is, what humans are better at are essentially the soft skills, connection, and being authentic. Most of the time, the clients are interested in pure outcomes. How do you differentiate between the two and convince customers that lawyers would be needed to enhance the results?
Well, firstly, thank you for the question. Great question. I think I would challenge the premise that an outcome cannot be achieved through human skills. I mean, I think clients do want outcomes, and so they should. You know, they pay lawyers a lot of money and legal professionals a lot of money. But the outcome is not something that's divorced from the human skills. In fact, what I was hoping to sort of get across in my presentation is that to achieve the right kind of outcome, you need a combination of the technology, the legal technical ability, and those softer skills. That's the really rounded human professional, isn't it? And you know them when you see them. They're really, really accomplished individuals who know their onions when it comes to the law, who know how to use the tech, and they're sort of superhuman as well. And I think those are the people that are going to excel in this environment. So I wouldn't draw a distinction between the two. I think, yes, let's focus on outcomes for our clients, absolutely. But let's do it with a combination of those three things: the legal expertise, the tech skill, and the human qualities as well. And let's get better at all three of those together. That's how I'd answer that one.
How do you see that? I've got a question for you on that. And I guess it goes back to that center cyborg analogy that you provided. How do you get that mix? And I'm also guess in part of this question is, does the mix almost become impossible of all of those skills that you need around the tech part, but also not really losing any of the skills that you need around all of the other bits of being a lawyer or allied legal professional? Is it almost going to end up being too much in one body? Or is it what goes and what stays? And I know you've kind of emphasised some of those in order to make it so that everybody kind of doesn't fall down exhausted in their one spot.
Yeah, I mean, I do worry about this, if I'm really honest with you. When I said we need to raise our game, I truly believe that we do. I think to survive as a profession, we need to be better than the technology. So we need to be the very best lawyers we can be. And that's a very big ask, actually. There's not many of us out there who can do that. And I wasn't including myself there when I said there's not many people out there who can do that. And I think it will put a strain on the expectations of lawyers. But, you know, that's being replicated across the board in clients that we're working with in corporate legal departments, for example. The business is putting pressure on those corporate legal teams to be more responsive, more data-driven, because they know the genie's out of the bottle. The technology exists to do that now. So I think we're all going to be asked to raise our game. I think that will put strain on the profession, and it may even result in fewer lawyers, or legal professionals, which, you know, I think we do have to see that as a distinct possibility. How do we prepare ourselves for that? Well, again, I think there's a responsibility on our educators to make sure that they're training all those skills in. That no longer will it be an excuse to say, oh, I don't do tech, or I can't work that, or I don't know how to work my video, or you can't have that excuse any longer as a lawyer. You can't divorce yourself from technology and say, I just do the legal technical part. You can't do that. So there will be an obligation to be all of those things and to be better lawyers. And it is a big ask of our profession, without a doubt, but we have to rise to the challenge, I think, and use generative AI as part of the solution.
I wonder also, Isabel, whether or not it's an evolution. So if we do start to work with Gen AI in primary school, for example, that's what's happening. Certain of those skills will come along the continuum, won't they, for when folks ultimately become lawyers. So it's almost like, is there going to be a bigger focus for different groups of people that are at different stages of embracing this technology? And we've got to think really carefully about that in terms of all of the things that you were talking about.
I think you're right. We can't just start discounting half of the generational workforce, assuming that it is generational, which I don't accept, actually. We can't start alienating people with really deep and helpful skills just because they haven't come along the journey. I'm absolutely with you. And I think using the term evolution is a very helpful way of looking at it. I think there are senior leaders with really deep skills that many of us could never hope to emulate, given where we are in our own careers, who may not have had the exposure to this technology. This doesn't mean then they're defunct. They're still very valuable individuals. So we have to find a way, I think, to upskill those people and get them excited about the technology. And I genuinely believe when you've seen it, you can't not love it. I don't really understand how it's so exciting and it's so easy and accessible for all of us. And I think sometimes the issue is simply that some at a more senior level don't have the time because they're busy professionals. They haven't been exposed to the technology. They see it as something that the kids are using, when, you know, it would revolutionize how they operate. And with all the brilliance that they have and the lived experience that they have, that combination with the technology would be mind-blowing. So I'm absolutely with you. Let's not alienate people here. This is a collective, endeavor, using the skills of everybody and making sure we take upon ourselves a responsibility to share learnings across the board, just like you're doing now with this fantastic summit. You know, and this is free for everybody to join. What a fantastic gift and privilege it is for us all to be able to learn from each other. Let's continue in that spirit and evolve. I agree with you there.
Yeah, fantastic. Got a couple more questions here. I buy into your argument that EQ is the key differentiator. However, we have a global deficit of EQ. How do we address this deficit?
Yeah, I mean, can you teach EQ? I don't know. I mean, I think it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge. I don't know. That's such a hard question. I don't really know the answer to that. I do think, though, when there's a lot to be learned from your peers and the people that you work with in your organization. And the legal profession is under such pressure, time pressure all the time, just to get stuff done, that often we don't have time for the sort of more human elements. And if we were able to use generative AI to alleviate some of the burden, and to increase our productivity without us then filling it up with more work, that might allow us a bit more time to concentrate on the human factors. I mean, where I work now in my consultancy role, you are expected to be a very good people leader. It is expected of you, is that you can't say that's not what I do. Whereas sometimes in a law firm context, not all law firms, I'm not being disparaging, but because people are so busy, the people skills slightly get pushed down the priority list. And I think that's because people are so busy and employment demands are so intense. So I do think that EQ is a kind of thing you're born with. That doesn't mean it can't be encouraged and trained and emulated, but I think you have to give people the space to be human and train them to be better leaders and better sort of emotional leaders as well. So I think it can be done, but again, it's a challenge and a strategic challenge for law firms and corporate legal teams.
Absolutely. I know that we've got just a couple of minutes to go, but I did want to squeeze in just one more question, if I may. And it is, keen to know if you agree that one of the essential human skills we will need to get the best from AI is empathy. And if so, why?
Empathy. Gosh, what an intelligent bunch you've got here, Terry, chucking these at 7 in the morning. Empathy. Well, I think empathy is part of EQ. Empathy and the ability to understand others. I suppose in the context of AI, that's an interesting question. Instructing and prompting. I used to think prompt engineering was just a sort of made-up thing, but it's really critical. I'm sure you've had a lot of coverage of this, right? It's so critical. And it's just like instructing a junior person or a colleague. And to do that, you do need empathy. You do need to understand. You do need to be able to sort of communicate effectively, which is part of empathy. So, yeah, I do think it is intrinsic to getting the best out of this technology. But maybe the way I'm defining empathy in this context is more clarity of instruction and understanding of communication skills that will get you the best output. That's how I'm slightly skewing the definition of empathy to support my argument, because I think that interaction with the machine does need to be thought through effectively. Not sure that's exactly the answer the person was getting at, but come on, that's a tough question at 7 in the morning. That's all I can say.
Yeah, it is. But you're spot on. I mean, it's part of the design, isn't it? It goes intricately into the design of whatever the solution is or however you use the technology. So it was an excellent answer.
Oh, thanks, Terry.
and with that, sadly, we have come to the end of our time, but just an amazing presentation, Isabel. Thank you. And thank you for closing us out with with such a big bang as well. Really, really, really appreciate that. So thank you very much. To everyone who was with us, I really hope that you enjoyed this session. The session will be available as a video on CLI's free resource hub, and it will also be available as an episode of CLI's Legalpreneurs Sandbox podcast. So lots of places for you to pick it up there. If you would like to receive updates about these or the work of CLI, then obviously be sure to follow us on LinkedIn or lots of other social media. If you have questions that come out of this, I also know, and I'm sure that you will, I also know that Isabel is incredibly generous with her time, and you can find her on LinkedIn and a bunch of other social media as well. So with all of that being said, and bringing our 2 days to a close, again, Isabel, such a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Terry, and thanks for putting on this fantastic summit.